Today we're going to be doing a product comparison here on the Last Battalion between the Landwehr Cavalry made by Calp Miniatures and Perry Miniatures. I should stress from the outset, this does not have the word versus in the title, precisely because it's not designed to be oppositional or confrontational. I'm a big fan of both of these ranges, so if you're looking for a more controversial product comparison, then this probably isn't the video for you. This came about because I was in the middle of deciding which Prussian light cavalry units to build for my current collection, and it just so happened that I needed half a dozen to represent one Landwehr cavalry regiment and half a dozen for another, and it was an excellent opportunity to be able to get miniatures from both companies. I have already Prussian miniatures from both of the companies, and it fitted in quite nicely because of the pack sizes as well. So here on the right you have PN23, which is the Prussian Landwehr cavalry in Litvaker galloping with lances upright, which is a bit of a mouthful. And I got two packs of those, and you can see there's 3 horses and 3 riders in each, with the traditional white fluffy insulation. And then on the left, these are the Calp Miniatures equivalents. These are the Prussian Landwehr cavalry advancing, and I picked some slightly different poses, so troopers looking forwards and with slight body turns to give some variation. These are the actual mounted troopers themselves. As you can see, they're Perry at the top and Calp at the bottom, just to give you a rough sense of them side by side. One thing I've noticed on both sets of the miniatures, as I just put a little scale in there for you, is that the Calp miniatures overall are slightly chunkier and blockier in their aesthetic. That's just a difference between the sculptors and the way they've gone about their ranges. Everybody has their different style, and I like both. As a consequence, there is a slight visual difference when placed side by side. As you'll see later on as well, the Calp miniatures do seem slightly larger, but actually, once painted up, I don't think there'll be any great visual difference on the tabletop at all, and they're both excellently sculpted miniatures. One thing you will notice is that in the Perry case, the saddle furniture is separate and is on the horses, whereas here on the Calp miniatures figure, you can see that the saddle furniture and everything around it, that detail has come with the mounted figure itself, and so the sculpt for the horse is clean, and this will then sit on top of that. The detail on both is excellent. The only difficulty here is that the Calp miniature sits slightly backwards onto the board when laid down, so I need to pick it up to give you a proper side-by-side comparison. And you can see here on the Perry miniature, the usual extremely high standard that you could expect from Perry miniatures. Although, saying that, 2 differences are, one, the type of metal used, I think, is very faintly different. The Calp miniatures seem to be made from a slightly softer, if that's a way of describing it, metal. The Perry miniatures is both harder and shinier, as you can possibly see on the image. I'm just going to sit them up here using the bit of metal from above, just so you can get a proper front view of them. So that's a difference, and it also makes a difference because, as is kind of traditional, the Perry miniatures figures are often slightly harder to clean up because they have mould lines and flash bits and those little metal worms that you get, whereas the Calp miniatures do not, so there is a trade-off there. To emphasise that, you can see here, even just visually, the 2 different horses from the manufacturers, the metal difference, whatever that might be, as I think visually evident, and also the cleaner nature of the Calp miniatures sculpt, in that you can't obviously immediately see any bits of metal that might need cleaning up. There are some available, but just not as many. You can see here the moulded saddle furniture on the Perry miniatures horse that I was talking about earlier at the front and back, so the figure will sit in between those, whereas here it's not present and will instead be put into place when you apply the rider. Just to re-emphasise that, I'll just bring the riders across so you can just see that. One thing I am interested in is how that affects the way they naturally and immediately sit onto the horse sculpts, because I have found in the past that I have to do a bit of bending and manipulation of the Perry troopers in order to get them to sit without large gaps, sort of John Wayne style, with their legs akimbo on the backs of the horses. Just to demonstrate that, I'm now going to mount up a couple of the figures just as they are. I had to clip the metal off the bottom of the Perry one to do it. And here's the Calp Miniatures Trooper, And once I get him in position, you can see it's a really nice, comfortable fit on the horse. There aren't any obvious major gaps between the saddle furniture and the trooper figure and the horse sculpt. And it's just a really neat fit. So there's not a great deal of need for any sort of corrective manipulation or anything like that. And it's been well designed and well sculpted to fit together in that fashion. So a significant tick in the box for the Calp Miniatures figure. Less prep time, less cleanup time, fits together immediately with no need for any particular alterations. This is then the Perry figure. Now, one thing I could tell immediately was that anything that I was talking about before about that sometimes quite wide John Wayne pose of the legs is neatly disguised by the presence of bulkier saddle furniture on this cavalry sculpt. On previous mounted models I've got where the saddlecloth or furniture is flatter, it's much more obvious that the figure doesn't sit down onto the back of the horse as well, whereas this one, where that might be the case, I think it'll be disguised by the nature of the sculpt. And then this is the two figures side by side, just to adjust the rider, just to see them of a height. And you can see that, yes, the Calp Miniatures figure is slightly bulkier, I mean very faintly. It's all in the aesthetic of the way that the range has been sculpted. They're very, very similar in nature, so it's slightly taller as well, but realistically the differences are negligible. They're both excellent quality miniatures, and I'll certainly be getting more of them in the future to bulk out my Landwehr cavalry figures. And this is them then side by side as well, and you can see excellent comparison, brilliant detail in both. Really, really happy with them. The last thing I'll point out is that the Perry Miniatures pack comes with these soft metal lances, and just like the pikes, lances, spontoons, or standard flagpoles in any of their packs, I'll be replacing them with these steel spears that I'll cut to size instead of using the ones that are supplied. To complete them, I'll be using GMB flags for the pennants for their lances. I hope you found this video interesting. I tried to steer away from a traditional single product unboxing video for a bit more of a comparison of a like for like between two ranges, because it's the kind of video that I find interesting when I'm doing my research. So I hope that you have found it of some use as well. If you like this kind of video, please let me know in the comments, and I will endeavour, where possible, to do similar videos for other products in my collection. But in the meantime, thanks for watching and happy hobbying.